Seize the moments. Sart shifted the long wooden skewer from the heat. The meat was cooked through, which was good since the vegetables were starting to blacken a little. Almost perfect, he thought, almost. Oh well, perfect was the enemy of the good, someone once said. He lifted a second wooden skewer from the fire and passed it to Gillig before setting back to enjoy the evening meal. Any hope that the arrival of supper might put an end to Gillig's talking were dashed immediately when his friend took one great bite from the meat and then kept talking with his now full mouth. The point is that Udu's right. Now is the perfect time to attack. The Druj are on the defensive, and the wizards are pushing them in the mountains. If our generals have got the nerve for it, we could smash into the barons and take half the territory before they know what's hit them. But we have to go in hard. We need to cut them down before they can get up to any of their old tricks. Sart sighed wearily, as his friend made it clear he was going to continue the conversation as they ate. They'd been talking for nearly an hour now, ever since he offered his old friend a plate of food and a spot at his fire. To be precise, Gillig had been talking at him for nearly an hour. Sart didn't usually take much interest in politics, and didn't always feel he had too much to contribute once his friend got the ancestors in his ears. He wanted to just enjoy the food. The last thing he wanted was an argument. And yet, I don't know, there are bands of orcs in the barrens that are slaves of the Druj. I reckon we're better talking to them. Convince them to rebel and throw their lot in with us. The more orcs on our side, the less on theirs. Surely that's for the best. Gillig shook his head as he frantically chewed to try and clear his mouth so he could speak. If we do that, then the Druj will be on to us. We'll lose the element of surprise. They'll have time to prepare. He paused for a moment to swallow before carrying on. Besides, how many orcs are left there? I reckon the ones who are up for siding with the Empire are camped with the Navarre now. The ones that are left, they're the ones that chose to stick with the Druj. They made their choice, they can suffer the same fate. Sart stared into the fire, mulling over his friend's words. He wasn't fully convinced, but frankly he'd had a belly full of politics for an evening. Maybe you're right, he said at last. Whatever happens, it'd be good if the legions are fighting side by side again. If we're going to raise the horse banner over the barons, we should get everyone behind it. Gillig's mouth was again too full of food to talk, but this time he was nodding furiously. Overview. At the preceding summit, Bloodcrow Udu received the backing of the greater majority of the Imperial Orc Assembly in support of their call to arms to reclaim the Barrens. Dawn has a long history of conflict in the Barrens and has attempted to conquer the majority many times, but implacable opposition from the Druj has always stymied them. But with Ossium conquered and the Druj on the back foot in the forest of Ulnak, the Imperial Orcs could seize the moment. What heroes do. The Empire has a long and difficult history with the Barrens. The land is claimed by a number of different Orc tribes, all of whom have been subject to the brutal rule of the Druj at some point. All of them have also crossed swords with the Dornish on more than one occasion. At present, one of the tribes, the surviving Great Forest Orcs or the Paytart Orcs, are living in Navarre lands, having been forced to flee their homes. It is not known what remains of the other tribes, although the Druj came to have eradicated at least one, the Ravin. What is known is that the entire territory is firmly in the grip of the Druj, who will doubtless oppose any attempt to take it from them by force. There are two mandates that the Imperial Orc Assembly could pass, each based on gathering support for a specific strategy to claim the Barrens. Either would need the Imperial Orc Nation to back that strategy, and each would provide clear benefits that would help them to claim the Barrens, provided the two Imperial Orc armies commit fully to that strategy. The benefits will last for as long as the two armies can maintain the assault. They will quickly fade if either army pauses. Everything ends in death. The Imperial Orc Assembly could enact a mandate to encourage their armies to destroy the Druge in the Barrens. The Imperial Orcs could adopt an invasion strategy spearheaded by the Summer Storm and look to cut them down. The Barrens are home to thousands of Orcs, mostly Druge, and those who have thrown their lot in with the Druge. Every Druge that is cut down in the Barrens is one less Druge to brutalise the Urizen in Zenith or ambush the Dawn in the Forest of Ulnak. The Assembly could call on every Imperial Orc to look to the Summer Storm and make the Barrens run red with the blood of the Druge and every Orc who serves them. We, the Imperial Orcs, declare our ambition to claim the Barrens. With vigilance we know when to strike, and as such we will not abandon our allies within the Empire. Upon every battlefield, no matter the cause, and with every action we commit ourselves to in service to the Empire, we do mark our intent, reaffirm our loyalty, and fortify our ambition to claim the Barrens. Bloodcrow Udu, Autumn Equinox 383YE, upheld. Greater majority 100 to 0. The Druge are such an abomination that even their own ancestors loathe them. We send, named priest, with 100 liao to urge every Imperial Orc to unite behind the banner of the Summer Storm. We should drive them from the Barrens to the Howling Abyss. Synod Mandate, Imperial Orc Assembly. If this mandate is passed, then it will have a powerful motivating effect on the Imperial Orc military forces. In the following season, both Imperial Orc armies would be able to attack the Barrens using the order to drive them into the Abyss. Drive them into the Abyss. The ability of this army to capture the territory is increased by 1/10. Casualties inflicted by this army are increased by 3/10. Casualties suffered by this army are increased by 1/5. The army takes every opportunity to engage with the enemy and try and hurl them into the Howling Abyss. No quarter is given as the army pursues their enemy relentlessly. This emphasis on engaging the enemy means that the army loses more troops itself, but the commitment to fighting and preparations it takes mean that it suffers comparatively less than the opponents it engages. This mandate requires the Imperial Orc armies to be certain that they have the resounding backing of the entire nation as they seek to eradicate the Druge. If it seems that this is not the case, then their motivation will falter. As a result, the order will continue to be available for as long as both Imperial Orc armies are attacking the Barrens, or at least one army is using this order. The option will no longer be available if either Imperial Orc army leaves the Barrens, or neither army attacks the Druge using this order. Every Imperial Orc who can fight will be expected to support this conquest wholeheartedly. As a result, any Imperial Orc military unit that does not support the Imperial Orc army will receive a 2-rank penalty. If the conquest of the Barrens using this order at least twice is successful, then all the problems dealing with the inhabitants of the Barrens that have built up over recent years would be irrelevant. Everyone who served the Druge would be dead or scattered. No meaningful opposition to imperial rule of the Barrens would be left. Slaves of History. The Imperial Orc Assembly could enact a mandate to encourage their armies to try and unite the Orcs of the Barrens under their banners. The alternative to a war of conquest is for the Orcs to adopt a strategy led by the Winter Sun to look and inspire a rebellion. As Ossium has shown, the Druge have extracted a terrible price from every Orc tribe that they have conquered, using torture and cruelty to break their spirits and enslave them. Imperial Orcs know how heavy such a yoke can be, but they also know how strong a people can be when a yoke is lifted. Rather than fighting the Druge and looking to conquer the Barrens, the Assembly could call on every Imperial Orc to look to the Winter Sun and fight alongside the local tribes, helping them to rise up and overthrow the Druge. We go to the Barrens not as conquerors but as liberators. We send, named priest, with 100 liao to urge every Imperial Orc to unite behind the banner of the Winter Sun. We will break the chains the Druge have placed around our allies' limbs and free them all. Synod Mandate, Imperial Orc Assembly. If this mandate is passed, then it will have a powerful motivating effect on the Imperial Orc military forces. In the following season, both Imperial Orc armies can attack the Barons using the order to free them all. Free them all. Casualties suffered by this army are decreased by 3/10. Casualties inflicted by this army are decreased by 1/5. The army will reach out to local tribes to convince them to rise up and overthrow the Druge. Arms and armour will be shared with anyone who is prepared to fight. The force will lead attacks on the Druge garrisons to help the Barons' Orcs claim their freedom. The army avoids pitched battles and focuses on gaining allies among subject populations, looking for any groups that are ready to rise up. This mandate requires the Imperial Orc armies to be certain that they have the resounding backing of the entire nation as they seek to free them all. If it seems that this is not the case, then their motivation will falter. As a result, the order will continue to be available for as long as both Imperial Orc armies are attacking in the Barrens and at least one army is using this order. The option will no longer be available if either Imperial Orc army leaves the Barrens or neither army attacks the Druge using this order. Every Imperial Orc who can fight will be expected to support this conquest wholeheartedly. As a result, any Imperial Orc military unit that does not support an Imperial Orc army will receive a 2-rank penalty. If this order is used at least twice as part of a successful conquest against the Barons, then the Empire will be faced with dealing with the resurgent tribes who view the Barons as their home. They will need to negotiate with these tribes who will have gained weapons, confidence and organisation from the uprising. These Orcs are bound to look favourably on the Imperial Orcs, and it might be possible to persuade them to join the nation. However, such outcomes are impossible to guarantee and will likely depend on many factors. The Barons' Orcs have a history of conflict with the Dornish, almost as long and difficult as their conflict with the Druge. The presence of any Dornish armies acting to support Imperial Orc forces as they attempt to take the Barons would undermine attempts to build links with the local tribes and make any subsequent negotiations more difficult. Competing mandates. These two mandates are competing with each other. If both are raised, whichever judgment passes with the greatest margin is considered to be successful, and all other competing mandates fail. If two mandates tie for the greatest margin, then all mandates fail. The Assembly is considered to have been unable to choose which mandate should be authorised. Timing. If the Imperial Orcs want to seize this moment to attack the Barons, then timing will be critical. To seize the moment, the Imperial Orc Assembly would have to pass a mandate at the coming summit. Otherwise, the moment will pass. Neither Orc army is in position to attack the Barons at present. The Summer Storm is in Bregisland and the Winter Sun is in Segura. They would almost certainly have to issue orders to move towards the Barons to be in range to attack the territory next season, when the mandates would take effect. The wolves should be fed. The Ambition Assembly could enact a mandate to provide explicit support to the Imperial Orcs campaign to claim the Barons. The Imperial Orc Assembly was the only assembly in the Synod to speak of the Barons, but they are not the only assembly that could influence the matter. A number of priests in the Assembly of Ambition have noted that this conquest would be a momentous undertaking, breathtaking in its scope of its ambition. The Barons is a vast territory rich in natural resources. Conquering it would double the geographical size of the Imperial Orc nation and provide them with invaluable new resources. If the Imperial Orcs wipe out the Druge defenders, then it could inflict a grievous blow on one of the Empire's greatest enemies. If they choose to ally with the local tribes and work with them to free the Barons, it could break the chains of thousands of Druge slaves. Either deed would be extraordinary. Weil of the Golden Pines, a Navarre guide who follows the path of ambition, has asked the Assembly to consider throwing their support behind the Imperial Orc plan. There are bound to be those who argue against the plan, he says, claiming that there will be a legion of naysayers queuing up to argue that now is not the time. Thus, he wishes the Assembly to recognise the towering ambition the Imperial Orcs have expressed and endorse it with a mandate. The ambition of the Imperial Orcs is a shining example to every Imperial citizen of what can be achieved if we realise our dreams. We send named priest with 50 liao to urge those who strive to follow the path of ambition to recognise the virtue of this dream and to lend them every support they can muster. Synod Mandate, Ambition Assembly. If this mandate is endorsed, then the Imperial Orc campaign to claim the Barons will have the explicit blessing of the Assembly of Ambition. By providing auras of ambition to those forces fighting in the Barons, the Assembly could enable them to attempt otherwise impossible acts of virtue, as they drive the Druge back. In the following season, any Imperial Orc army or army that is supporting them can attack the Barons by issuing the order that no price is too high. No price is too high. Casualties suffered by this army are increased by a fifth. The ability of this army to capture territory is increased by 3/10. The general can order his troops to take every opportunity to capture territory with no price too high. The troops will assault every enemy position no matter how well defended, pursuing any opportunity to claim ground and force the enemy back. The army will pay a significant price for such an ambitious strategy, but they will capture territory at an unprecedented rate. This mandate recognises the towering ambition of the entire Imperial Orc nation as they attempt to claim the Barons. If Orc commitment seems to waver, then the motivation provided by this mandate will falter. As a result, the order will continue to be available for as long as both Imperial Orc armies are attacking in the Barons. The option will no longer be available if either Imperial Orc army leaves the Barons. The strongest of all warriors. The Vigilant Assembly could enact a mandate to provide explicit support to the Imperial Orcs campaign to claim the Barons. The Assembly of Ambition are not the only assembly that could influence any campaign to claim the Barons. The Civil Service have determined that the Assembly of Vigilance could also play a vital role if they choose to support the Imperial Orc attempt to claim the territory. Of all the Empire's enemies, the Druge are the most notorious for their use of deception and trickery in war. They are masters at laying ambushes and conducting lightning surprise attacks before disappearing back into the night. They are skilled at using poison and treachery to defeat their enemies. Regardless of what strategy the Imperial Orcs pursue, defeating the Druge will require constant vigil. To aid them in their campaign, the Assembly of Vigilance could endorse the following mandate. Seek out the poison in your neighbours' fields. To defeat the Druge, we must see through their deceptions and see past their lies. We send, named priest, with 50 liao, to urge those who would claim the Barons and defeat the Druge to be vigilant in their every ruse. Synod Mandate, Vigilance Assembly. If this mandate is endorsed, then the Imperial Orc campaign to claim the Barons will have the explicit blessing of the Assembly of Vigilance. By providing the auras of vigilance to those forces fighting in the Barons, the Assembly could enable them to be alert and attentive to every detail, allowing them to surveil the territory even as they attack the Druge. The following season, any Imperial Orc army or army that is supporting them can attack the Barons by issuing the order to gather intelligence in the same way as an army with the scouting quality. This mandate recognises the vigilance of the entire Imperial Orc nation, as they seek out the poison in the Druge's lands. If the Orc commitment seems to waver, then the motivation provided by this mandate will falter. As a result, the order will continue to be available for as long as both Imperial Orc armies are attacking the Barons. The option will no longer be available if either Imperial Orc army leaves the Barons. The sum total of the wills. The Great Forest Orcs might be persuaded to support an Imperial Orc incursion into the Barons. Chief Valak, or a representative thereof, is believed to be attending the winter solstice as a guest of the Navarre. Another group that might be persuaded to support an Imperial Orc incursion into the Barrens are the Great Forest Orcs themselves. This tribe of orcs used to dwell in the heart of the Paytat, a dark, malingering forest that spreads across the western border of the Barrens, touching Brociliand and Rykos. They were forced to flee into the Empire when the Druge conquered the Barrens and are currently living in the lower Tarn Valley in Theranin. If they could be convinced to aid an Imperial Orc incursion into the Barrens, they might be able to provide military support and provide crucial intelligence. The military strength of the surviving Great Forest Orcs is limited, but they have promised to fight alongside the Navarre if asked. Could they be persuaded to lend the same support to the Imperial Orc armies? The heart of the Paytat forms an effective defence that makes attacking the Barrens much more difficult. Something malignant dwells in the ancient forest, and an army that attempts to pass through the region must face this threat. The Great Forest Orcs know how to neutralise this threat, or at least how to bypass it safely. This is how the Druge were unable to launch their surprise attack into Rykos in 367 Year of the Empire. Could the Great Forest Orcs be persuaded to offer the same assistance to the Imperial Orc armies? Chief Valak, the war chief of the Great Forest Orcs, or a representative thereof, is believed to be planning to attend the next summit as the guest of the Navarre. Precise details of the visit are not yet common knowledge, but this might provide an opportunity to negotiate directly with the only Baron Orcs tribe that has any contact with the Empire, and potentially with their Briar allies as well. Irrefutable proof of freedom. The descendants of those who founded a free Briar state on the edge of the Barrens might be persuaded to offer their aid. The General Assembly could call on them to support the Imperial Orcs with auras of freedom to encourage the Baron Orcs to rise up against the Druge. There is one other group present in the Empire who could provide material assistance to an attempt to free the Barons. They are not Imperial citizens, and the aid they could provide might not be fully compliant with Imperial law, but as long as the campaign takes place in the Barons, it could be considered to be outside Imperial jurisdiction. Montanians are a group of humans who fled the Barrens in the company of the Paytat Orcs. They are known to be the descendants of the Briars who tried to found a free Briar state on the edge of the Barrens decades ago. Their rebellion was defeated and everyone assumed they were gone, but it appears that some of them managed to survive. Although they are coy about the details and meticulously careful not to preach or practice their faith openly in Imperial lands, they are known to have several priests among them who are widely believed to be able to create auras of the false virtue of anarchy. What they don't have is any spare liao. The civil service have spoken to a representative of the Montanians, and they have confirmed that they could help, provided they were given the means and the explicit approval of the Imperial Synod to act. They are keen to help free the Barons, but they are open about the fact that they have no liao, and categoric that they will not create any auras of anarchy, which they call freedom, without an appropriate statement from the Synod urging them to do so. They understand that such an act would be distasteful to the Synod, but they have no wish for them or their Paytat allies to be executed for heresy. If the General Assembly chose to pass an appropriately worded statement of principle, calling on the Montanians to support the emancipation of the Barons by employing auras of freedom or anarchy, then the Montanians will give their full support to the Imperial Orcs. If they are also provided with 50 doses of liao, they will use their liao to create auras of freedom among the Orc tribes of the Barons. It is impossible for the civil service to know how effective that would be, since they have no understanding of the auras the Montanians might employ and no way to predict what effects they might have. All they can be certain of is that if the Imperial Orcs choose to issue orders to free them all, then any auras of freedom created among the Orcs of the Barons would have a powerful effect, making the overall strategy significantly more effective. Of course, if the Imperial Orcs choose to focus on eliminating the Barons' Orcs, then the efforts of the Montanians will be utterly futile. Near, possible, and inevitable. The Dawn National Assembly could enact a mandate to reinforce their own claim to the Barons. Although the Barons are now firmly in control of the Druge, there are still Imperial citizens surviving there. At one point there were between 10 and 20,000 Dornish citizens there, mostly in the west around the settlement at Dry Castle. No one is certain how many remain, but what is clear is that not all of them are pleased to hear that the Imperial Orc Assembly have declared their intention to seize the Barons. Many Dornish nobles have dreamed of conquering the Barons for decades, and some remain committed to the idea. In theory, the Dornish might launch a crusade of their own to take the Barons, but that is not easy at present. Most of the Dornish armies are engaged fighting the Druge in the forest of Ulnak. The Dornish Assembly called for just such a crusade in 379 YE, and the attempt ended in failure. As a result, the Assembly are simply not in a position to give effective support to a concerted effort to claim the territory. However, the Assembly could influence residents who remain in Dawnguard. They could urge the noble houses to shun the Imperial Orc forces and provide them with no support or assistance of any kind. The Dornish conquest of the Barons is near, possible, and inevitable. We send named priest with 50 liao to urge every loyal Dornish citizen to give no succour to any force in the Barons that does not march under a Dornish flag. Synod Mandate, Dawn National Assembly. If this mandate is endorsed, then the Imperial Orc campaign to claim the Barons would be rebuffed by the Dornish who survive in Dawnguard. There is no suggestion that the Dornish would attack other Imperial citizens, but they could show their opposition to the Imperial Orc advance simply by refusing to cooperate in any way. The lack of local support would mean that any Imperial army would experience significant logistical problems as they attempted to maintain supply lines. As a result, any Imperial Orc armies or allied armies attempting to launch an invasion of the Barons from Semerholm would experience impeded movement when attempting to move into Semerholm. The Winter Sun and the Summer Storm could still reach the Barons next season, but only if they travelled to Theranin and attacked the Barons in the south, or risked travelling through the Great Forest of Paytat. It would be impossible for them to invade from the north without the use of powerful magic to speed up their armies. Furthermore, any Dornish military unit that supported an Imperial Orc army, regardless of where that army was fighting, would suffer a 2-rank penalty to its effective fighting strength. This mandate recognises the rightful claim of the Dornish to the entire territory. As such, the effects would last until the start of the summer solstice 384 Year of the Empire, unless overturned by other events. It would also send a clear signal to the Dornish people that Dawn has not given up on the Barons and intends to fight for them. Submitting alternative mandates. While this situation is focused around the Imperial Orcs, the opportunity for the Virtue Assemblies and the Dawn National Assembly to become involved demonstrates that there are other assemblies who might be able to weigh in here. Priests from any nation or Virtue Assembly might have their own alternative mandates to submit. Check the rules carefully. You can only submit an alternative mandate for an assembly you are part of. You can only submit one, and it will only be added to the Wind of Fortune if it offers a different outcome to those mentioned here. Further reading. The Barons. Conflict in the Barons. A summary of the history of Imperial involvement in the Barons.